So in this video, we will continue with section 3.2. We will be adding in other bases. We'll be doing some mental math and some estimation, but we're going to start by doing what's called the opposite change algorithm. And it's just a way to make adding things easier. So if I was trying to add these first two numbers, let's say using the old school method, I would be looking at the 7 plus 5, and that's going to give me 12. I would have to regroup, or old school says carry the 1. No one says carry the 1 anymore. We'd have to regroup and trade, okay? And I don't want to have to do that. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one right here, 187, and I'm going to make it something easier. So I'm going to add essentially 13 to that number, take it all the way up to 200. So you could go straight to 13, or like here I showed you do it in steps, add 3 and then add 10 more. So what we're going to have to do now is on the bottom. So on the bottom, we're going to take this number, and instead of adding 13, we have to subtract 13. That's why it's called the opposite change algorithm. So we're going to subtract 13, and that gives us another number. And notice now it's much easier to add that. We can add that in our head. 200 plus 282 is 482. Much easier to add in our head than the first number. Okay, the next one is actually easier, not as much we don't have quite as many things to add. So I'm going to be going from 46, I'm just going to add 4 to get 50. So that means on the bottom, I'm going to subtract 4 to get my 63. And again, those numbers are much easier to add. Just 0 and 3 is going to give me 3, and 5 and 6 is 11, but you can think of that as 50 and 60, so that'd be 110. Okay, so that's called the opposite change algorithm. It just makes it much easier when you are adding two numbers, okay? Now, once we get to section 3.3, we're going to be subtracting two numbers, and that's going to change everything, okay? But just when you're adding, whatever you do on the top, you're going to do the opposite on the bottom number, okay? So now we're going to talk about adding in other bases. Again, why in the world are we adding in other bases? It's just so you understand adding in base 10 so much better, okay? So let's start using blocks. Now, I don't have blocks to show you on my iPad, so I'm going to just draw them. So I'm going to start with 13 base 5. So that's 1 rod and 3 units. It looks like base 10. It looks like what we would draw also if we had base 10, but that rod actually only has 5 little units in it instead of 10. Okay, 44 base 5 is going to look like that, 4 rods and 4 units. So now when you start to add these, since we are in base 5, that means you're going to regroup in groups of 5 rather than 10. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to grab 5 of these guys. There's 5. And I'm going to regroup them and trade them for 1 of my rods. So what do I have left? I'm going to change this a little bit. There we go. So what do I have left? I have 2 of those. Yeah, these guys right there. I've got those 2 left. So I've got 2 units. So now look at my rods. Notice my rods I've got more than 5. So I'm going to take these guys, those 5, and I'm going to regroup them and trade them for a flat. And I have how many of my rods left? I have 1 little rod right there. So I'm going to put a 1 there. And then I have 1 flat. So my answer is going to be 112 base 5. And again, you can put a little 5 down there. If you do this with your students, they tend to put that 5 up top so it doesn't look like a base. Okay, let's do the next one. 43 base 5. So 43 base 5 is going to look like that. 4 rods, 3 units. And then 123 base 5, 1 flat, 2 rods, 3 units. We're in base 5. So we'll start off getting our units. I've got 6 of them. So 5 of them I'm going to regroup. I'm going to trade it for a rod. And I have how many units left? I've got 1 little unit. So I'm going to write 1 down. I'm going to do the same thing with my rods. I've got 5 of them right here. So I got 5. I'm going to regroup, trade it for a flat. So how many of these guys do I have left over? Those little rods, I've got 2. So I have 2 there. And then I've got, 2 flats? And that's not enough to trade. So we'll have 2 flats. So that's 221 base 5. All right, 1 more. So 444 in base 5. We got 4 flats, 4 rods, and 4 little units. And we are going to add just one unit. So now I've got to do the same thing. I've got 5 right here. I'm going to regroup and I'm going to trade it for 1 flat. So how many units do I have? I don't have any left, right? I traded them all. So I've got 0 units. So now it's time to trade my wonderful rods here. And again, those rods have 5 in them. And now these 5 rods, I'm going to regroup them, and trade them for a flat. So how many rods do I have left? I don't have any rods left. Okay, now let's do another trade. So I'm going to trade these 5 flats. And when you trade that in, we're going to get a cube. I'm going to try and draw a cube. All right. So how many of those flats do I have left? None. But I do have 1 cube. So my answer, let's write it semi-neatly, is 1,000 base 5. All right. There's our answers right there. Okay, so this is when you have blocks that you are working with. Well, sometimes you don't have enough blocks, or you go into the 4th dimension. Okay, so what I mean by that is if I had 5 of these guys and I traded out, what would I trade it for? I don't have a cube that's a 4th dimension cube. Okay, so sometimes that's when the concrete sort of breaks down. So what we're going to do is start using a chart. So I'm going to be adding the same ones that we just did, 1, 2, and 3, but I'm going to be using a chart. So this is sort of some steps that you would be showing me on your test as well. So we're going to start off with my 13 plus 44, base 5, same thing that we did up there. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my ones. So there's my ones, and notice I have 7 of them. Whoops. So there's my 7. Notice that's what I have up here. I had 7 up there, okay? Then I'm going to subtract. This is where I traded. That's the green that I did up here, this green part. So that's what this is. So I'm going to subtract 5. So I wind up with just 2, just like I had here, okay? But when I subtract 5, I also have to then add 1. So let me show you where I added that 1 is right up here. That's where I added that 1, okay? So now I'm going to add those guys together, and I got 6, just like I did up here. Let me find another color. Let's do gray. All right, so that is these guys up here. Notice how many I have. I've got 6 of them, just like I have down here. I had to regroup up there in the purple, right, and trade it for a flat. So that's what this part is right here. I'm subtracting 5. So now I just have one of these guys left, just like I have one right there. And then I had to put my 1. I traded it for one of these guys. Whoops. Sorry about that. I've got to trade it. That's where I put my 1, and that's this guy right here. And then I add them all together, and I just had 1. So my final answer is 112 base 5. Same thing I got up top. Okay, let me show you the pattern or the chart for number 2. So number 2, I've got 43 and 123. When I add those 2 3s together on the far right, I'm going to get 6. Okay, just like I got 6 up here. So there was my 6, and here's my 6. I'm going to regroup, right, and then trade it for this one right there. So there's where I subtracted the 5. Whenever you subtract the 5, you're going to have to add that 1 right up there. So when I subtracted 5, I have 1 left. That's that little guy right there. And I write it down there. Okay. Now I'm going to add these guys together. So that gives me, what, 7? 4 plus 2 plus 1. That gives me 7. That's the same thing that I have up here. I've got 7 up there. So there's 7. Again, I regrouped. That's what I did with that right there. So I regrouped, so that's my 5, and I traded it, and I put that 1 here, just like I drew the 1 up there. Okay? And when I subtracted, I wound up with 10. Excuse me, 2. So I've got 2 right there. And then I add these guys together, and I wind up with just 2. So my final answer is going to be 221 base 5. Now let me see if I can explain this one, hopefully maybe without referring to the blocks. So I have 444 base 5, and I'm going to add 1. So when I add the 1, I wind up with 5. Okay, so I'm going to subtract 5, just like I did up there with the blocks. When I subtract 5 and trade it out, I'm going to get 0. Whenever you subtract, you're going to have to put that 1. Whenever you subtract 5 here, you're going to put 1 up there. That's you regrouped, and then this is the trade. Okay, so I do it again. 4 plus 1, that's going to give me what, 5? Same thing happens. I'm going to subtract 5, which gives me 0. And when I do that, I should have put a 1 up there, and I probably did, but it probably got erased. All right, and then I'm going to add again, and I get 5. Again, I'm going to subtract 5, and whenever I subtract 5, I've got to add my 1 over here. So when I subtracted, I put the 1 in. So when I subtracted, I got a 0. So my final answer is 1,000 base 5. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing. This time I'm going to use my chart, okay? I think I used a chart. Let me see. Yeah, use a chart. So I've got 110. That's base 2. So base 2 means that these guys just have 2 units in them, okay? And then 11 base 2. So now I'm going to add these guys together, and I get 0 plus 1. That gives me 1. I'm in base 2, so it takes 2 blocks to make a rod, so I'm done. I don't have to do anything else with that one. But these guys, 1 plus 1, that's going to give me 2. And it only takes 2 to make a rod. So I'm going to subtract. Oh, goodness, that was bad. Okay, so I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna subtract my 2 right here. Whenever you do that, you've got to add 1 right there because I'm trading out those 2 rods for a flat. And when I did, I got 0. I don't have any rods left. All right, now I'm going to add those 2 2's together. So that's this right here. Those, excuse me, the 2 1's together and get a 2. And again, I'm in base 2, so it only takes 2. So I'm going to subtract 2. I'm going to add that 1 in there. So that gives me, I don't have any of my flats left, but I do have a cube. So that's going to give me the number 1001 base 2. Now this one I could have done with blocks, okay? But this next one, I can't. How do I know I can't? Well, blocks only go up to this many numbers, right? You've got your units, you've got your rods, you've got your flats, you've got your cubes. But once you get to this guy, I don't have a concrete representation. Okay, there's not a fourth dimension. So, anyway, one thing else to notice in base 2, only have the option of using zeros and ones. That's the only option. Whereas up here in base 5, notice all my numbers that I wind up with. I can use a 1, 2, 3, and a 4. But once I get to 5, that's when I have to regroup. Okay? All right. So let's go ahead and do my addition. 1 plus 1, I always start on the right. So 1 plus 1, that's going to give me 2. 2 is not allowed in base 2. So I've got to regroup. So I'm going to subtract my 2 whenever I do that. I'm basically changing my units to a rod. Okay. And then I have 0 units left. So then I'm going to do my adding again. I've got my 2. Now I have 2 rods in there. So that means, once again, I can regroup and I can trade. And then I have 0 of those guys, what are we at? We're at rods. So now we're at flats. So I add those 2 together, and again, I get 2. All it takes is 2 to regroup. So I'm going to regroup. I'm going to trade it in for my cube. Okay, and now I don't have any of those flats left. Now I have 1 cube, which is great. And then I don't have to do anything because that's a legal number. And then here I've got 1 in the 4th dimension. So my answer is going to be 11,000 in base 2. This will take some practice, okay, for you to get used to doing this. So there's extra practice on extra practice videos on YouTube. Okay. So now let's do some mental math. What in the world is mental math? We're doing it in your mind, right? It's a process of producing an answer to a problem without using any manipulative aids. Okay. It's also not using any writing. Okay. Or well, I'm going to do some writing to sort of show you what I'm doing in my noggin, okay? So we've got 3 methods: adding from left to right, breaking and bridging, and dropping zeros, okay? So adding from left to right is exactly what it sounds like. So I have my 48, my 36. I'm going to grab the left ones first. So that's those guys. 40, excuse me, I'm at 58. 58 and 36. I'm not sure what I said. Anyway, so I'm going to add these together. Don't think of it as 5 plus 3. Think of it as 50 plus 30. So my answer is going to be 80 for that purple. Okay. So now 86, when I add that together, that is an 8, 8 and 6. When I add that together, I'm going to get 14. And then I just add that mentally and get 94. Okay. Adding from left to right is what most math teachers do. If you've ever had a math teacher that you're like, oh my goodness, how in the world are they adding this stuff in their head? They're going from left to right. So they're adding the tens place first and get 80, and then 8 and 6 and get 14, and then adding those together in their head. They are not thinking old school. All right, I've got to carry my 1, and that they're not doing that, okay? They're adding left to right in their head. That's how they're able to do it quickly. All right, so we're going to do the same thing, 22 and 39. I'm going to add my 20 to my 30 and get 50. Then 2 and 9 will give me 11, and then I just add those together and get 61. All right, now 56 and 37, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm adding 50 to 30, and that gives me 80. And then 6 and 7, that gives me 13. And then I add those together, and that gives me 93. It's much easier to add stuff in your head this way than to try and regroup and trade all in your noggin. Okay? That's called adding from left to right. It's like our partial sums that we already have done. Okay? It's just now we're just doing it mentally. That's what you're doing in your head. Okay, breaking and bridging. So when you break and bridge, you're going to break up the tens and the ones. Okay, so you're going to break the numbers and you're going to add the tens and then add the ones. So here's an example. 17 plus 68. I'm going to break 68 into 60 and 8. And then I'm going to just add my 17 and 60. I'm going to do that first. So essentially, it's somewhat like adding left to right, except you keep the ones in there too. So 60 plus 17 is going to give me 77, and then I add 8 to it, and that gives me 85. So I'm just breaking up that second number. So 48 and 21, I'm going to have 48. I'll break my 21 into 20 and 1. So 48 and 20 is going to give me 68, and then I add 1 and get 69. So that's called breaking and bridging. Then dropping your zeros. It's exactly like what it sounds. Notice that in this one, I have a bunch of zeros at the end, okay? 2 on each one. So I just ignore those and I just add 94 and 32. However you want to add 94 and 32, whether you break and bridge, whether however you want to do it. We're going to get 126. And then you go back through and put your 2 zeros on. Okay, same thing here. 57, 5,700, and then 600. I just add I just forget about those zeros. So I got 63, and then I add my 2 zeros back in. So dropping zeros is a lot of people already think to do that. Your students won't. You'll have to show them that technique. So let's talk about estimation. Estimation is where we're just trying to get an approximate answer. Why is this especially important for you as a teacher? It's because you're going to be having to do a lot of estimating in class as a teacher. You need to be able to figure out answers quickly in class. So you're going to make up some. Okay, so you may have a worksheet, you may be working and they need more problems. So you're like, okay, let me throw these up on the board. And so you're going to throw up, 4 or 5 problems on the board. You need to know if they are in the ballpark, right? So say this dropping zeros, okay? Let's say they start answering, oh, it's 126. And you're like, wait, it's in the thousands. They did something wrong, okay? So you need to be able to estimate things very quickly just to get those answers in class. Okay, so there's four ways. There's a whole bunch of ways, but here's the 4 we're going to talk about. Front end with adjustment, okay? Mathematicians are not super creative when it comes to names. So it's exactly what it says. I am going to do the front end. I'm going to do the hundreds. My 100 plus 300 plus 500. So that's going to give me, 900. Okay, so that's my front end. I did that. And then I'm going to look at the other part and just sort of adjust them. So I just sort of grouped them. And I said, well, these guys, if I put that together, that's about 100. And that's about 20. So I'm going to add about 120 to this. So it's about a little over 1,000. So if your students are winding up with, 2,965, you know that that's wrong. Okay. And you didn't actually have to do this problem to know if they're in the ballpark. Okay, let's do another one just so make sure you understand. So I'm going to just look at my hundreds, and I've got 7 and a 5. That's 12 plus 4, so that's going to give me 1,600. Okay, now I'm going to group these guys together. I grouped these a little different. I grouped to give you 100 and that to give you a 20. Now you could have said that's about 50 and that's about 60. So, and that's about 60. So 50 and 60, oh, that's about 110. So that might change a little bit, but we're talking an estimate. We're trying to get in the ballpark. So if you grouped it differently than I did, and as long as you show your steps and it makes sense, that's fine. Okay, so it's around 1710, 20. If you said it's around 1710, that's okay because that's a ballpark estimate. Okay, that's called front end with adjustment. You do your hundreds or thousands or whatever is the very far left end, and then you just adjust the others. Grouping nice numbers. This is similar to what I'm doing over here in the purple. Okay, so I'm going to group those two together. That looks to be that's about 100. Oh look, that's about 100 too. So these guys, that's about 200. So when my kids should get about 200. Again, you could have said, oh, that's about 50, maybe a little bit more than 50. That's about 80 and 60. Let's see, that's a little bit harder to group. Okay, so I want to group nice numbers, what I think are nice numbers. So these guys, I think those are nice numbers. There was an 80 and a 20. That's about 100. It's a little bit more than 100, but that's close. And then those two guys, oh, that's 50. That's exactly 50. That's pretty cool. And then this one's about 100. So now I add all those up and I get about 250. So once again, I just want to group nice numbers. So this problem would be a terrific problem for Scratch, for the Scratch method, right? Well, it takes a little while to do the Scratch method. So while they're working on it, you just do this grouping nice numbers, and you know they should be around 250. Okay. Clustering, that's when you look at these numbers and you go, huh, those guys are all about, I don't know, about 7,000. Every one of them's about 7,000. And we've got 4 of them. So 4 times 7,000, that's about 28,000. And the way I got that, by the way, is I ignored my zeros and I multiplied 7 and 4 and then added my zeros back, right? And so this next one, oh, all those, they look about 3,000. And there's 5 of them. Yeah, there's 5 of them. So that's about 15,000. And the last one is rounding. So the key is you've got to decide what you want to round to. Are you going to round to thousands? Are you going to round to hundreds? Are you going to round to tens? So we need to decide that first. Okay. So I'm going to round this to the hundreds. So this guy right there should be, about 3,400. And the one on the bottom is about 69. So that's going to be about 10,300. Okay, now that takes a little more effort than if I rounded to the thousands. Let's round this one to the thousands. So the first one, that one's about 8,000, and the bottom, that's about 1,000. So that answer is going to be around 9,000. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Okay. So first you've got to decide how accurate you want to be, what you're going to round it to. All right. So the only thing I have to show you now is this is straight out of a math textbook. I didn't say what grade that is, but notice that they have rounding and front end estimates. They're now in the textbooks now. You are going to have lots of this. Look at the multiple ways that you can do something, and look, they get about the same answer. You're going to see that a lot because Common Core is no longer it's my way or the highway. Okay. You're going to show them multiple methods, which is not a bad thing. So that is the end of this section. So now you should be able to do all of the working together worksheet.